Good morning, Spirit Sessions. This is Spirit Sessions, View of the Light, and I'm all by myself today. Teresa is off sick, and I'm still waiting for my guest to come on. Bex is at work, but I love you guys, and I'm here to talk to you today, hoping my guest is just having some tech problems. I was just talking to him, so I think it may be just a technical glitch. I'm seeing if I can get some other co-hosts in here from the West Coast. But you are very welcome to be here. Hey, if you have any questions about ape cats or Sasquatch, please post them. If anybody wants to be a live guest host, let me know and I'll send you the link. I'm here today just to talk to you about James Szubski. And James, I hopefully will be on very shortly. I'm hoping he's just having some tech problems. James is a former volunteer with the Search and Rescue, a wildland fighter, a mountain guide. James Szubski is going to discuss a wide variety of paranormal activity in the Columbia River Gorge, including the Klickitat ape cat, the Sasquatch, UFOs, portals, and a small humanoids. Now, if anybody knows where the Columbia River Gorge is, it's in Washington State. It's south of Seattle. It's this gorge that was formed from cataclysmic, apocalyptic forces of nature that happened. They're not exactly positive what caused this gorge to form, but perhaps its violent nature caused some things to really go up for the paranormal activity that comes there. Of course, Seattle, Washington. Yeah, maybe he's having an event right now. That's right, Nancy. I'm just hoping he comes on soon. That would be really a bummer. James will be able to describe what he does. He's the CEO of Margie's outdoor store in that area. And what's unique about his store, his outdoor store, is he takes and files. It actually is a reporting center for Sasquatch, the ape cat, any other paranormal events that happen in the Columbia River Gorge. So it's kind of a unique situation. He's turned his hobby into sort of like part of his lifestyle. So that's pretty amazing. Now, he's quite an outdoors person from what I've seen. Your brother-in-law, Daniel, who's working above the Northwest Territories right now, says it's very smoky up there. So even though they had rain this week, he's very smoky. Oh, here is James. Yay. And hey, James. This is another James. Hi, James. I'm going to make you big. Everybody welcome James Szubski. James, sorry about the miscommunication. That's what happened. This is my son-in-law, the other James, who has offered to co-host and listen to your wonderful stories with us today.
Good morning.
Hey, good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I got a little mixed up on the time zone change, and
everybody does.
We were getting started at 10 Pacific time, so I apologize.
No worries. James, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you kind of moved yourself over into this niche of collector of all things paranormal for the gorge?
Sure thing. So we were living up in Seattle, and my wife's mother passed away, and she had a couple of businesses here in the Columbia River Gorge. And so those passed to us, and one of them we had sort of turned into an outdoor store. And right when we changed the format to outdoor store, folks started coming in and telling us really amazing stories. We began hearing about people's Sasquatch encounters and a lot of UFO stories and some things even stranger than that. And, based on my experience in the military and as a search and rescue EMT, I knew that oftentimes there's some truth to some of those types of encounters. So we put up a big sign in the window that read, "File your paranormal reports here." And people started responding. And we have had now, it's been a little over a year and a half. So we started back in the really kind of the spring of 2022. And we have had over 220 different paranormal reports in just that short amount of time. And so it has been just an amazing experience. Really very, very interesting stories for coming through the door. And one of the things that we did at the very beginning was I instructed the staff that whenever somebody comes in, we're going to treat them with dignity and respect. We're not going to impose our idea of what they're seeing or what their story might be about onto it. We're just going to take in the data and see where it leads us. And so we've gained this reputation as, a safe place, a trusted place where you can come and we'll take you seriously. And it has been a really just amazing experience.
Oh, I think Rhonda's muted there. So, oh, there she is. Wow, that's really interesting. So, what kind of variance do you get on your Sasquatch stories from people? Are they all are a lot of them having similar experiences, or are they sort of wildly different to you?
Really the Sasquatch stories are just the tip of the iceberg. And so I don't know if some of your listeners can see behind me, there's a map. This is a map of the Columbia River Gorge. And there's really two counties in Washington state that are in the gorge area proper. One is Skamania County, which is on the western side, and the other is Klickitat County, which is on the eastern side. And because the Cascade Mountains runs through the middle of the gorge, the west side is a Pacific Northwest rainforest, and the east side is sort of a high plains desert. And so Skamania County was the very first government agency that ever protected Sasquatch by law. And so way back in it was like the late 60s, early 1970s, they passed an ordinance that made it illegal to hunt and kill Bigfoot in the county because there were so many reports going on here. Later that was updated, and it's interesting the way they updated the law was that it used to be a felony just to kill Bigfoot or Sasquatch in the county. Then they changed that to a misdemeanor, but if the creature was found to be humanoid, they would prosecute as though it was a homicide. Oh. And so it's they take it very seriously here. And so there are so many Sasquatch stories. In fact, Washington State has got the highest per capita Sasquatch sightings and the highest per capita UFO sightings, for that matter. And so Sasquatch is a big part of the culture. One of the things that was amazing when we first got here was that it seemed that everyone that we talked to either knew someone or had some type of unusual experience themselves. What we found, though, over these 220 plus reports is that really the Sasquatch encounters are fairly common, but there is a whole range of creatures or different types of beings that people encounter here. Some of them have no analog to anything that I've ever seen in the literature. And then the one that's really very interesting, we've had over 70 reports of an enormous black panther creature we call the Klickitat ape cat. And the very first report I had ever received on this creature, the individual said that they were orienteering, and it was just a few miles from our store in an area called Buck Creek. And their compass started acting strange. Shortly thereafter, they looked up and they saw this enormous black cat across the creek, and it was just sitting there watching him. And as he was telling me this story, we were, getting close to closing time. A couple of things struck me about his story. Of course, we have cougars out here, but cougars are never supposed to be black in color. When they express their melanin, they go from a tan color to a red color. And the fact that he was talking about a black cat in Washington State was unusual. He also said that the creature was standing 4 to 5 feet tall at the shoulder. Now, that's enormous. And it's larger than a tiger, which is the largest living black cat on Earth. And in fact, I did research after the fact and learned that there's only one creature in the fossil record that matches a cat of that size. It's called the American lion. It was an Ice Age cat. And it lived here in Washington State 10,000 years ago, but it's said to have gone extinct. So he was describing a creature that already was sort of off the charts in terms of anything that we should be seeing out here. About 15, 20 minutes into the story, he explained that the strangest thing about it is that it had a face that resembled that of a monkey. It had intelligent ape-like eyes and other primate features. So that was a really curious report. I'd never heard anything like that. The next day, I was talking to my employees about it, and we share these stories, and the entire staff really actually enjoys hearing these reports. It's one of the most fun parts of the job. And one of my employees started shaking, and she was having this very strong emotional response to the story. And she said, "Oh my God, James, I've seen that creature myself." And she was driving down Klickitat Canyon, which is on this map behind me, just over my shoulder here. And it's on the desert side of things. And it was close to dawn. And she saw this enormous cat-like creature walking near the side of the road. She actually was so struck by it that she pulled over and watched it for a short amount of time. I understand that she watched it walk into a small patch of tall grass, and it never came out the other side. She actually got out of her car to investigate. She wondered if maybe she should warn the local or the homesteads nearby. She eventually decided against it because she figured they'd think that she was crazy, because she was going to describe this enormous black cat. She didn't get a good look at its face, so she couldn't confirm that element of the story. Well, it's kind of a good thing that she didn't go and knock on people's doors and say, "Hey, there's a giant black cat," because when she told her family, they didn't believe her. And in fact, they said that she had probably seen a cow. Now, this is a grown woman, right? And it really kind of goes to show how folks really, really want to normalize experiences. And when they hear something out of the ordinary, even people that you love, their immediate response is to fill that space of the unknown with something that's known. And it's almost like if you were, driving down the street and you saw a red Ferrari and you told your friends, "Hey, I just saw a red Ferrari." And they said, "Oh, Ferraris are pretty rare. You probably saw a minivan." Like, the difference, right? Like, you have had enough experience, and all the folks who live out here, this is a pretty rural area. The gorge is, maybe 80 miles long, and there's probably a total of 70,000 people that live here, distributed amongst 6 or 7 little towns. And the folks here know their wildlife. We see creatures all the time, bears and elk and you name it, cougar, bobcat. And she clearly saw this panther, but her family was unwilling to believe her. What's interesting about that story is when she described the size of the creature, their comparison animal was a cow. So you can imagine that we're talking about a cat of just absolutely enormous proportions. So when I heard these stories, to me, they were credible. The first individual who had come in had been a friend of my mother-in-law. I should say friends of the family, more or less. My mother-in-law was before she opened her stores, was a pharmacist registered in 4 states. And his mother was having some medical issues, and she was able to give them some advice and sort of clear up that issue. So there was this family connection there. And to me, the guy had taken 45 minutes to work up the courage to tell me his story. And so that was credible. Of course, Missy's story, my employee, was very credible. This is a girl who, I should say, a woman who is so uncomfortable with the idea of lying that she doesn't feel good about playing practical jokes on her coworkers. Like, to her, that's a little bit not quite honest, right? And so with these two pieces of information, one right after the other, I thought, wow, there might be something here. So, of course, the store has an advertising budget, and I put out ads on the radio in the gorge area that said, has anyone else seen an enormous black cat? We also put up some flyers at the local trailheads, and people started coming in. And I was amazed at just how many stories there were. Like I said, we've heard probably 70, maybe even more than 70 now, 70 stories about people who have reported this enormous black cat. Now, to be clear, so of those 70, about half of them specifically state that the creature is enormous in size. And we'll get that kind of information. Like, someone will say, I was driving on the road at night and I saw it leap across the road. And when its body was extended, it was the length of 2 car lanes, right? So a white line to yellow line to white line, like that full length is the size of the creature. So about half of the stories describe that enormous size, and about a handful of them, I'd say less than 10, describe a creature with the monkey-like face. And, that first one was really confusing to me. I'd never heard of anything, and it was even difficult to imagine what it might look like, a monkey-faced cat. I was able to talk to a wildfire foreman. So this individual, she was the chief of a forest firefighting crew, and she was up in the area between Mount St. Helens and Mount Adams, which is just a little bit north of the gorge here. They were fighting fires up there. They got dropped off. It was a 3-day mission, and she said that the whole crew saw this creature with this monkey-like face. And the way she described it was that, how a German Shepherd has a long snout, but like a pug dog has a shortened face, flattened face. Right. And to her, it was this idea of the face being flattened, so not quite as extended. But for her, she said, yeah, monkey could absolutely be one of the ways you might describe this creature. And so they all saw the thing, and they were going to be there for 3 days, and they wondered what they would do if it entered their camp. Fortunately, of these 70 reports, none of them include any kind of hostile interaction. So there's no reports of it attacking animals or people or in any way acting aggressively. So very mysterious and very interesting.
That's really fascinating. And how about you? What is your experience? Have you had any experience with ape cats, or have you gone out looking? Like, I would be out, hiking, hoping I'd be seeing, like James, my son-in-law up here, was talking about when he was on Hemlock Mountain in north of Victoria, how he felt like he was being watched by Sasquatch. But how about you? What's your personal connection? Have you had any?
Well, so I should give you a little bit of background about the gorge. So the gorge is a really unique geologic area. And I will answer your question about my personal experience, but it helps to get a little bit of context of where we are. So here in the gorge is the largest river in North and South America that empties into the Pacific Ocean. And it's the only sea level passage through the Cascade Mountains. This place is so jaw-droppingly beautiful that back in the 80s, Congress passed a bipartisan law to protect it in a unique way. It was the nation's first national scenic area. And so that means that it's basically a natural national park, but people can live here and have businesses here. So it enjoys many protections, but it's also it's a place where people can live. Like I said, the west side is a rainforest. The east side is a desert. We've got these soaring mountains. You can go from sea level at the river and in half a mile be at 3,000 feet. Many of these mountains around here through the gorge are sheer cliffs because 15,000 years ago, there was these great ice age floods that ran through here. And maybe you've heard of Randall Carlson or Graham Hancock talk about these ice age floods that flowed across Washington State, eastern Washington State, and then emptied into the ocean at the end of the Younger Dryas period. Well, that happened right here in our backyard. And so we've got this basically, it was a flood that was equal to all the rivers on Earth combined times 10. And that at some points here in the gorge was over 1,000 feet deep. And it stripped away all of the topsoil and everything and left behind these stunning cliff walls. We have over 90 waterfalls here. Wow. And what was exposed were these layers of basalt rock. So about 15 million years ago, this enormous fissure opened in the earth at the Idaho-Washington border. And trillions of tons of lava spewed out. And they ran 300 miles all the way across Washington State through the ancient Columbia River Valley to the ocean. But there were over 300 different eruptive events. And so they formed like this sort of layer cake of rock formations. Now they're like these enormous basalt columns. So you've probably seen like the Giant's Causeway in England, where they've got those big hexagonal pillars. Well, we have that here, but they're sort of like these stacked up on top of each other. What happened, though, was that these eruptive events occurred over the course of a couple million years. And so each one flowed, and then when it hardened, the magnetic material in the rock oriented towards the Earth's North Pole at that time. Well, the Earth's North Pole wanders. In fact, in the last 100 years, it's moved over 700 miles. And so each one of these layers of rock has a different magnetic orientation to it. So there's this really complicated electromagnetic environment here. And so you can imagine that like each one is different. And when you look at the government navigation maps of the gorge, they say in bright pink letters, warning, your magnetic compass readings will be off in this area. And so this is a known magnetic anomaly going on here. In fact, the mouth of the Columbia, where the Columbia River empties into the Pacific Ocean, is known as the graveyard of the Pacific. And there have been over 2,000 shipwrecks there. For comparison, the Bermuda Triangle has had 300. So we're talking about a place where there's this incredible, like very strange activity. You layer on top of that this, so the Columbia River has 14 hydroelectric dams, and it produces 44% of all of the country's hydroelectric power. And so there are these great energy producing facilities here, and we're crisscrossed with these high power lines, right? Transport that electricity out of here. We produce enough electricity to power a city the size of Seattle and then 7 more just like it. So there's this really complex electromagnetic environment. There's a lot of really strange things going on here in that regard. And when you're here, you feel it. Like the river has been flowing for 17 million years. So there's this incredibly strong momentum of energy flowing through here. And if you come here, it's stunningly beautiful. And if you can calm your mind for just a minute, even if you're not spiritually sensitive at all, you can feel the energy moving through this place. And I have theories that, because we experienced this twin cataclysms, one of fire with this lava that flowed through here, and one of water with these ice age floods that flowed through here, that we are at a place where the boundaries between worlds or dimensions or whatever has been worn thin. And because of that, it's almost like we're at a crossroads where things that normally exist in, adjacent or parallel dimensions have the ability more easily to enter into our world. Or I think that many people who are here accidentally wander into those parallel dimensions themselves. And so you may be out hiking and you think that you're, at Beacon Rock or at Horse Thief Butte or wherever it is. and you have inadvertently slipped into another area, or another almost mode of a dimension, so to speak. And you know, and so because of that, people have these really unusual experiences here. Your question was, have I had any of these types of experiences myself? So prior to coming to the gorge, the first time I ever came here was back in 1988. I was a soldier, U.S. Army infantry, and my Army buddies and I would come down here and we'd go rock climbing and adventuring here in the area. And I've always loved the area. When we first moved down here after my wife's mother died, I was in a place called Horse Thief Butte. Now, Horse Thief Butte, imagine like a classic desert mesa. So it's got that flat top and the steep sides, and it's right there at the edge of the Columbia River. And but what's amazing about Horse Thief Butte is that when you get up close to it, it's actually riddled with a labyrinth of hidden passageways and amphitheaters. The walls are decorated with petroglyphs. It's a very powerful spiritual place. And in fact, there's really strong evidence that Native Americans had vision quests there and things of that nature. You can climb around, you can get on top of it. And right to the west of Horse Thief Butte, there's a small, maybe a couple hundred yards. And then a cliff drops off and there's Horse Thief Lake. And so I was up there, it was probably around mid-June. This was before we had started formally receiving reports in the store, before I had heard anything about a giant black cat in the Columbia River area. And I was looking down at the lake and I saw something swimming down there. Now, because there were waterfowl, ducks, and things like that, and I could get a sense of the size, but I was still, 500 or 600 yards away. I didn't have binoculars with me, so I really couldn't make out what I was seeing. But what I saw was this dark colored creature. It was obviously larger than a person, but I would say smaller than a car. So somewhere in that size right there. And it was sort of swimming, almost patrolling the center of the lake. So it was swimming in circles. It would submerge for up to 5 minutes at a time and would come back up to the surface. And, I had told you that I was an infantry soldier and I was a wildland forest firefighter and a search and rescue EMT. And so I have spent a lot of time in the forest and the wilderness. And I know my creatures pretty well. And I was scratching my head. I could not figure out what kind of large creature would be swimming in a lake like that. Now, a bear might swim, but bears are typically point-to-point swimmers. They have a purpose when they're going to cross a body of water. They're not going to,
they just don't go for fun. No.
Exactly. And bears never submerge, at least, especially not for 5 minutes at a time. And the other creature it might be that we have out here that's that big would be an elk. But again, elks are point-to-point swimmers, and forget about them ever submerging. That's not what they do. And they're rarely outside of a herd. And so, at the time I just cataloged it as, I don't know what that was. Nothing seems to make sense. And it's just a strange anomaly. And then after we started receiving reports about this giant cat, it was only retrospectively that I realized that it may have been that. Now, what's really curious about that is there's a series of petroglyphs on the west side of Horse Thief Lake. And there is a Native American tradition about a race of supernatural panther protectors. They're called the Meshepeshu. And the Meshepeshu are said to come from the underwater realm. And when you talk about Native American stories, they'll talk about things coming from the earth realm, from the sky realm, and from the underwater realm. Those are beings that have a foot in both worlds, both in the spirit world and the physical world. And the Meshepeshu are said to be these sort of Black Panther protector creatures. And what's interesting is one of the sources that I uncovered said that these creatures look like a Black Panther with the face of a man. And I thought, wow, that is really interesting. Well, what really sort of brings it all together, that those petroglyphs on the west side of Horse Thief Lake, one of them looks like a cat with wavy water lines under its head. Like it's got a cat-like face with pointed ears, sharp teeth, big round eyes, and these wavy water lines underneath its head. And interestingly, this particular petroglyph is on a rock that's laying on its side, and there is a large crack that's going through the water lines on the petroglyph. And so, one of the theories that we have is that, this may be some type of supernatural creature that's been witnessed here in the gorge for thousands of years. We don't know. So that's one of, you had asked what kind of experiences I've had. And that's the one that most directly relates to the ape cat. My wife and I have seen glowing orbs in the gorge. And I actually have captured a picture of one. And it's, very unusual. Sort of this blue orb. And I'm very familiar with photo editing. I've been using Photoshop since it first came out.
The difference between a lens flare and an orb, yeah.
Yeah, and it is true that it is. Many folks can capture lens flares. They mistake them for some type of supernatural anomaly. There's a couple of tells with lens flares. One is that they're always so they're typically perfectly circular in shape. They have a geometry to them. And the other thing is that this particular image that I captured is maybe 4 miles from the store, 4 miles west of the store. There's a grain in the photograph. I was taking a picture of a very strange singular beam of light. It was almost like I don't know, just this straight shaft of light coming out of the clouds. And so I was taking pictures of that. And when I'm viewing the pictures, I saw this orb. And the grain of the photo, so there's some grainy noise in there. The orb has the grain over it. Now, when you have a lens flare, that's right up next to the camera, array, the digital array that actually captures the image. And so the lens flare is always clear and doesn't contain the grain. So anyway, we have this picture. It's pretty interesting. But what's more interesting, it is right underneath Underwood Mountain. And we have had an individual sent us a picture of what they thought might be a UFO over Underwood Mountain, taken from a town called Mosier, 11 miles away. And so they're looking at this thing, and it looks like a classic tic-tac shaped UFO, like the kind you saw on the gun cameras from those fighter jets. And we did a little image enhancement. We could see no props, no wings, and no normal modes of propulsion. So that is sitting literally in a straight line right above where I took the picture of the orb, up on top of Underwood Mountain. Underwood Mountain's maybe 2,700 feet tall. And then on Underwood Mountain itself, many people live there. There's a number of wineries up there. And we've had reports of individuals who on the ground have seen UFOs from their homes. And so that area right there is another one of those places where it seems like there's a lot going on. You go a little bit north.
It's almost like the gorge has created portals, from the things that things can slip in and out. Even UFOs are using them with their technology to slip in and out.
Yeah. I don't know. Are you familiar with ECETI Ranch? So ECETI
I'm familiar with ECETI Ranch. I've been to Mount Shasta, but I am familiar with ECETI Ranch. Some of our guests have been to ECETI Ranch.
Yeah. So ECETI Ranch is just 20 miles north of the store. It's right underneath Mount Adams.
I didn't know it was that close. Oh, that's awesome.
So we are, that's part of the gorge mystery and wonder. So ECETI, for your audience who doesn't know, stands for Enlightened Contact with Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And Jim up there has been running his place for a couple of decades now, at least. And they claim to be in contact with many different types of extraterrestrial intelligences. People
as well
can
as
come
Sasquatch too.
Yeah.
As well as a lot of Sasquatch.
Yeah, you pay $50 or something like that, and you can camp out there, and people watch UFOs fly around Mount Adams all night. People come from all over the world, and many people come as skeptics and they leave believers. Well, what's interesting is that they say that one of the races that they're in communication with is a race of feline humanoids. And so there's another possible connection there. And, we're talking like that first encounter that I had described. That's maybe 15 miles away from the ranch and right down the White Salmon River. So there's so much going on here. And it's really, I would say, just a wondrous, magical thing. I have been a lifelong adventurer, and I've had some really just stunning experiences. When we got down here, and suddenly you layer on this whole, you could call it paranormal, you could call it spiritual element to these my outdoor experiences. It's just been really amazing. So I have a 9-year-old daughter, and we got an old FJ Cruiser, and we sort of tricked it out with cameras and gear and all kinds of equipment. And when we get reports, my daughter and I head out into the mountains and we go try to track down some of these things that we hear about. And so, we'll go look for, we've made castings of footprints and gone on all kinds of really cool adventures. And so it's got, big stickers on the doors that say APCAT research vehicle. And it's just, honestly,
That's awesome.
It's a lot of fun.
I know my son-in-law's here, and one night when we were at my place, which we figure is a hot spot for UFOs, he was actually one of my witnesses to see our it was a light ship, what we call the light ships, because we have the ones that blink in and out that come in, but this was the orange sphere. Remember that, James?
Unexplainable, like nothing I've ever seen in the sky before.
For a long time too, like for 5 or 10 minutes, like we watched it, and then we went out trying to get closer, but we never did. But it was pretty. Yeah, I'm glad they finally saw it and don't think their mother-in-law is crazy anymore.
Wow. I think that's a really important thing to recognize, and it's one of the sort of unexpected gems of this whole project. Is like I said, we have a very strict policy that we are going to believe the witness, right? And it is certainly possible that people could come in and tell us tall tales. And the way I looked at it was no harm. Like, I'm not trying to put myself off as a scientist. I'm not trying to prove anything. But what's happening is that people are having legitimately unusual experiences. And there's no place that they can go to talk to about them. They get nervous laughter, even from family members, right? Your normal support group doesn't know what to make of it. You don't know what to make of it. And I can't tell you how many times I've talked to somebody who has had some kind of extraordinary experience, and the emotional release for them to have someone believe them and take them seriously is so rewarding for me and for them as well, to be able to allow there to be a space where there's something that I don't know what it is, right? And I don't need to try to fill that in immediately with some kind of off-the-cuff explanation. And for them to be believed, to be heard, to be listened to not be immediately told that they're crazy, to say, yes, we've had reports like that from other folks. You're not alone. It makes this whole endeavor so worthwhile and rewarding, to give people that opportunity. And the really fun part, honestly, you can imagine, like, it's like having a new Scooby-Doo mystery walk through our door a couple times a week. Like, we have all of this.
It would be awesome.
Really cool stuff. And, it's so it's like the world is filled with wonder. So much of our world, scientists pretend like we've got this all on lock, and if we don't understand it today, we'll understand it tomorrow. It's just a matter of time. But the truth is that no, there are true mysteries out there, and it's just so incredibly fun. and amazing to be a place where people come and share those with us. It's gotten to the point where I'll be at the grocery store or at the post office or even just walking down the street. People, my rig is pretty recognizable. It's got all kinds of spotlights on it and cameras and everything else. And of course, I mean, to be honest with you, I have some stickers on it for the store. And so it's a tax write-off. So really, we've kind of gone crazy with this thing. It's got, gas cans and water tanks and winches and everything on it. And so it's kind of a fixture out here. But people will come up to me and they will tell me their stories. And I'll have a, 30-minute conversation with somebody about their Sasquatch encounter.
It must be hard to get groceries.
Well, honestly, sometimes it's a bit of it takes longer than you thought. Get in the mail, thought it was going to be a 5-minute run, and 20 minutes later you're, but honestly, to hear these stories, and it's really very rewarding and satisfying that people have come to trust us and that they are willing to share their stories with us. So they know that they're going to be heard, and they know that it's a place where, or it's a friendly ear. And and so many folks, it's also really comforting to, I always protect folks, their anonymity. Anonymity?
Yeah, you can say that word. Go ahead. I can't.
Anonymous.
I make sure that they don't reveal their secrets, right? or their name. And so they know that they're going to be safe and they're not going to be outed or anything like that. But, I've had senior law enforcement officials come and talk to me. And it's really fun because I've got, like I said, such a vast quantity of experiences that I can say, we heard another report about a UFO near your town in that same kind of spot. So this was a fun one. There's a town called Trout Lake. It's maybe 20 minutes north of my store. It's really close to the East City Ranch. And a woman contacted me because I'd put out a post on the local Facebook community page asking for if anyone had certain kinds of experiences. And she said, well, I had a really amazing encounter up there about 5 years ago. I'm camping there again this weekend. If you come out, I'll show you where it is. So I drove all the way out there, met her and her family at a campsite in Trout Lake. And then she drove me 11 miles up towards Mount Adams, southwest side of Mount Adams. And she and her son described this time they were camping, the mother, the son, the mother's boyfriend, and the boyfriend's brother, I should say ex-boyfriend. And they had heard this pretty remote area. They had gone to bed, but the fire was still sort of glowing, and she saw things passing between the fire and the tent, and they were just like 10 feet away. And so they got nervous. They had a string of LED lights that were on a switch, and those lights got turned off, and the only way to turn them off was with this switch. And so they got up and couldn't sleep, sitting around the fire. They switched back on the lights, so the batteries hadn't died. Something had manually manipulated the switch. And then they started hearing whistling. And so the son, who was maybe 14 years old at the time, whistled back, and they got this sort of call and response. Well, soon their whole camp was surrounded by whistling creatures. They estimated 8 to 12 of these different whistling creatures surrounding them. Then the sun started to rise, and they saw, she calls them devil dogs. She knows that she says they weren't dogs for sure, but they were the size of Great Danes. They were hairless with gray skin. They were bounding around, enormous, able to whistle. And as the sun came up, the sun, in her perception, seemed to chase them away, and they scattered off into the forest. Now, her son was there, and her current sweetheart, and some of their, jointly held kids, I guess. And they were all really excited because she had been telling this story for 5 years, and they finally got to see the campsite where it happened. And the mother and the son, the core of their story was the same, but they quibbled about certain details about who was sitting where on what side of the campfire and stuff like that. The kind of things that you would expect, people after 5 years to have remembered incorrectly, and then one person when we actually got there, like, oh, well, yeah, you were right. I was wrong, stuff like that. But the core of their story remained essentially the same. And so this is a complete one-off story. These strange, large, dog-like creatures that are able to whistle and seemingly afraid of the sun. And I had mentioned that, so Sasquatch stories, that's pretty, it's like bread and butter out here. It's like pretty common. It's not that big of a deal. I mean, I suppose it's always a big deal when you see a Sasquatch. But there are a number of stories like that. We've got this cat creature, a lot of stories on that. But then there are ones like that. There's another story. Another one of my employees actually was driving through the desert area around 1:30 in the morning. And he was on his way home, area he'd driven through many times. And he saw a strange bipedal creature, no taller than the hood of his car, standing on the side of the road. And it was skinny and had a head that looked like a praying mantis. And right as he drove past it, all the lights in the center of his console went out and his cell phone started going crazy. About a couple hundred yards down the road, he started feeling dizzy and nauseous, and he actually pulled over to the side. And he thought, oh, James is going to want to know about this. Maybe I should go back and check it out. And then he thought, hell no, I'm not going back to see that. And then he went home. The next day he told me about it. And so again, like, this is one of those stories. Interestingly, at that same location, as I asked him about that, he said, what's weird is in that same spot, I have seen owls standing at the side of the road.
Oh, the owl connection, Mr. McClellan.
A number of different times. And so I went out there later in the vehicle, we call it the cryptid, to go investigate. And I didn't find any tracks, but I did find owl pellets in that area. And so that owls are, traditionally emissaries between the spirit world and the physical world. Obviously
some people, say they shapeshift into owls as ET shapeshifts into ET owls. Yeah, I can see that.
Very, very common to have owls present before, during, and after an abduction experience. And
or a Sasquatch experience, apparently, too, from one of our friends up north here, Brian Bland, who comes out of Vancouver. He's heavy into Sasquatch.
We've even heard stories of folks that say that they have seen a Sasquatch that transformed into an orb. And so, like I said, there is just so much going on out here. It really is amazing. It was sort of like, when you're in the forest and you turn over a rock and you see this whole set of creatures underneath there. And that's sort of the way it feels like out here. I think that our unique geology, we do know through the work of Dr. Michael Persinger, who created that thing called the God helmet. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but he was able to create these reproducible experiments where by manipulating magnetic fields in a helmet you could wear, people had perceptions of, a sense presence and all kinds of different experiences that mirrored spiritual experiences or supernatural experiences. And so what I think might be happening here is that we've got this really complicated electromagnetic environment, and it is affecting people's brains with physical mechanisms. Our brains have, I think I read that it's 5 million magnetite crystals per gram in certain structures of our brain, right? And so magnetite is obviously an element or molecule which is magnetically sensitive. And so this is a place where this environment is very unusual magnetically. And I think what is happening is that people's perceptive capabilities are shifting. So if you're normally on channel normal everyday life, and the electromagnetic environment here shifts your perceptive capabilities one channel over, and you're able to perceive things that may always be present, but your limited perceptive capabilities it's outside of the normal range. But when you're here, that range is adjusted through our weird geology, and you're able to perceive these things that are normally not possible.
That makes so much sense to me, because I was out the other night and we were supposed to have aurora borealis. So we went out, took a look, and you could just sort of see something in the sky. I held up my iPhone and I took a picture, and it has a 3-second exposure. Well, it was like you turned on a freaking aurora borealis in Northwest Territory. It's like, and so I'm saying it's there, and I'm saying to my husband, see, it's there, even though we can just perceive it. How much are we not seeing with our eyes? It's like that.
I agree with you so much.
So
yeah,
how much are we
not
seeing?
We all know that, like, we don't see infrared or ultraviolet light. We all know that dogs can hear things that we can't hear. Our brains and our whole bodies have a very narrow band of what we're able to perceive, right? Like, when you think about radiation has always existed, but we hadn't discovered it until, like the early, late 1800s, early 1900s. Even electricity was a mysterious force until Ben Franklin was flying kites in his backyard during lightning storms back in 1750. And so it's really, if you think about it, more reasonable to believe that there are things that are existing that we don't perceive, like that are outside of our perceptive capabilities. Everyone's had a pet that looks at something that we can't see. It's like, what are they looking at?
And you go, ooh, yeah. Sometimes it's spooky at my ass when they start seeing things. Yeah.
And coupled on top of that, we've all been trained that these things aren't real. And so, there's this really strong, social construct that makes us normalize things or disregard things or not even identify things truly as what they really are. Oh, you didn't see a Sasquatch, you saw a bear, or you saw a stump, or you saw whatever. Like, there's some way that you're going to justify it to the social norms. And so out here, part of what I'm trying to do is sort of break down those social constructs and open up a space where we can start to see these things, or at least give them a fair trial in the light of day without dismissing them with a hand wave, and saying, oh, it's nothing.
So your daughter must be way well on that way. Like, she's for my poor son-in-law is welcome to the weird when he married into our family. I know we now have a road trip down to your area because he's in Victoria, so he's straight north, and we've always talked about coming down to Seattle, and because one of my friends lived there, and then so now we just what is it, about 3 hours from Seattle down to where you live?
Yeah. It's pretty. I mean, it's a long drive, but it's not impossible. I drove up to Seattle and back. My son lives in Seattle now, and so I was up and down in a single day. And so I was tired. Don't get me wrong, but pretty amazing.
Lots of lovely places to visit along the way. Yeah, it sounds like a road trip. Sounds like a road trip, James. You get back up for it.
Let me know. Honestly, part of the reason why I'm doing these interviews is because I am trying to raise awareness for what an unusual place it is. There's only, one guy, 200 reports. Like, it is really hard for me to keep up with everything. And I, never have considered myself a, paranormal researcher. I don't know. I'm sure that people who are more spiritually sensitive than I am will have unique experiences. People have more time in the saddle, investigating unusual phenomenon. I'm happy to.
I got to hook you up with Jim Perry. He's from your area. Yeah. He's all into investigating, and he's pretty cool.
But there's just such a range of wonder and mystery out here that I really just want to share with folks. I should back up and say, if people want to get a hold of me, you can write to staff@margiesoutdoorstore.com. That's also margiesoutdoorstore.com is, that's our website. And people, we just a few months ago made our paranormal reporting form digital, so you could go online and file a report. Yeah. Typically, the way that these reports happen is people will come in And so we have a form that people can fill out. A lot of times people just want to tell their story and are interested in writing it out. And, since I'm not purporting to be some type of scientist who's, studying this in a academic way, I'm less concerned about, documenting all of these things in a sort of academic sort of a mode. And really what I'm, when we first started, I really wasn't sure what we were trying to do. It was just, I know that people have stories to tell. Let's hear what they have to say. And so now that we've had so many, I feel a responsibility to start communicating and letting people know what's going on out here. We look for patterns, and we're trying to find, trying to explore these mysteries in a sort of more relaxed way. I will tell you that with this Klickitat ape cat, just recently someone posted a video to a Facebook page. It was like one of those community pages, you have to like sort of, it's gated and you have to get in. And it shows this big black cat wandering around on their property. Of course, like all these kind of things, it is, distant and grainy. And then Facebook, of course, degraded even further. I've tried to contact them a number of times, but for whatever reason, they haven't responded yet. So just on the verge, like in the next week or two, we are going to post $1,000 reward for anyone who can come forward with video footage of the Klickitat ape cat.
Yeah, you guys must have lots of trail cams out there. There must be something being caught.
Yeah, and I'm super curious about this. Fortunately, our stores are successful, and we, have resources to be able to, trick out this FJ Cruiser research vehicle. And
anytime you can hook your hobby in with your business is an awesome thing.
And but even if what we're talking about is just a mutant cougar, like a cougar that has somehow expressed black melanin.
Yeah, the linguistic or whatever they call it, the dark green.
I think it's to me, even if it's not a paranormal thing, even as just an animal unrecognized by science, that is amazing, right? Like, how cool and fun is that? And so it's absolutely worth it to me to put my money where my mouth is. And
James, people have been convicted on murder raps with less evidence. Seriously. So, we just, people dismiss lots of things out of hand when it's, whatever.
Now, there's a really interesting theory that this creature escaped from the animal testing laboratory at the Hanford nuclear site just upriver. And if we have a little bit of time, I can tell you that story too, because it is fascinating. Sure.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm going to edit out the first part where I was yammering on for no reason.
Sure. So upriver from here is the Hanford nuclear site. And so during the Second World War, of course, the Allies were terrified that the Nazis were going to unlock the secrets of the atom before the Allies did. And so they created the Manhattan Project. And everyone is aware of the Los Alamos laboratory where the engineers and the scientists developed the bomb. But what a lot of people don't know is that in Eastern Washington, they created the Hanford nuclear site, which is where they actually forged the plutonium that fueled the bombs. Now, what they did was the government basically came in and took 600 square miles of desert landscape out there right along the Columbia River. And the people who were living there, they were evicted. And the Native Americans, who was their traditional hunting grounds and spiritual burial grounds and everything, they were kicked out. And they started building the world's first industrial scale nuclear reactor. Well, so back then, everyone was concerned that they would build the bomb, the Nazis would build the bomb, but they were also really worried about what the Nazis would do with mutated creatures, right? Because the Nazis were really into creating super soldiers and super animals and all that kind of stuff. In fact, there's even
that's who's living down in Antarctic now. Sorry.
Yeah. So the Nazis actually resurrected an Ice Age creature called the aurochs, which is this giant hyper-aggressive bull, and they populated a forest in Poland with them. And so, like, as the Department of Defense was looking at this, they said, okay, well, of course we're going to work on this bomb, but we need to have someone here who is studying the effects of radiation on animals. And so they, from day one, Hanford had an animal testing laboratory. And the guy that they tapped to run it was a guy from the University of Washington named Dr. Lauren Donaldson. And his only academic achievement prior to this posting was that he had created a super animal. It was called the Donaldson super trout. And it was a fish that he had done special breeding with and special, nutrients and all kinds of other stuff. And it's a trout that is 8 times larger and stronger than a normal trout. It can swim in freshwater and saltwater. It reaches sexual maturity in half the time. And it's super survivable, right? In fact, it's still alive today. They stock fisheries with this animal. And so Lauren Donaldson is the guy they put in charge of the animal testing program at Hanford. And just to give you a sense of scope and scale, like, this was the government's most top secret site in the world. Like, this is the very beginning of the Department of Energy. So, like Stranger Things, all that weird stuff that they were doing, the lab was a Department of Energy lab. Anyway, and so there's a lot of parallels to, what the Department of Energy does is really high-end, very strange research. So they're running this lab, and eventually Donaldson goes to the South Pacific, for the Bikini Atoll testing and the disastrous Castle Bravo test. He gets replaced by a guy named Bill Baer, who is a World War II veteran specializing in amphibious warfare. And so they stay in contact, and then this lab grows and grows and grows. So the war ends, Cold War begins, and they start doing crazy testing out there. And it's got to the point where they could house 1,000 large animals at Hanford at a time. So this is like a huge, enormous effort, right? Well, Bill Baer died in 2014, but he left behind some oral histories. And he describes how they were testing apex predators, and those apex predators escaped. So in the tale that he tells, which is backed up by newspaper clippings at the time, they had, I think it was, the reports vary, between 20 and 30 alligators there on site. And they're doing radiation tests on them. In fact, in one of these interviews, he actually holds up a picture of the device that they used to irradiate the alligators. Like, it was the real deal. Well, one night, 6 of the alligators outsmarted the scientists, escaped their pen, and they got into the Columbia River. Oh. And yeah, so you've got, think about it, 6 irradiated experimental apex predators swimming around in the Columbia River, right? And this is like, people fish there, like people swim in the river. And so they had sent out this Army hunting team. And from July to January, they tried to hunt down these alligators, and they only ever caught 4 of them, right? So there are 2 irradiated apex predators swimming around in the Columbia River Gorge. And there have been stories all the way, like in this interview, Bill Baer says even in the 80s, he was getting questions from Fish and Wildlife people asking him if he knew anything about alligators in the Columbia, and he would just hang up and say, nope, don't know nothing, and hang up and laugh about it. Like, and so that sort of gives you a sense of like the kind of crazy stuff the Cold Warriors were up to. So what does that have to do with cats? Well, I have to tell you about dolphins before I tell you about cats. So since 1958, a quarter of the U.S. nuclear stockpile has been guarded by dolphins. And the reason is that one of the greatest threats is scuba divers. So Soviet scuba divers, especially with night vision goggles. Many of our nuclear sites are on waterways by necessity. All nuclear reactors need water for cooling, which is why Hanford has got 90 miles of river coastline, because they use the Columbia River water to cool the reactors. Well, if you're trying to identify a Soviet scuba diver, sonar doesn't work because you don't know if you're looking at like a sea lion or a tuna or some other kind of fish, right? But they realized way back in 1958 that they could train dolphins to identify divers. And so what they would do was they had this special apparatus that they attached to the dolphin's snout, and it sort of had a barbed harpoon on it. And the dolphins were trained, once they identified the divers, to ram that harpoon into the flesh of the diver. And then a balloon would inflate, and that would bring the diver to the surface. And then the Navy would scoop them up and, be able to gather intelligence from whoever that was. So Hanford is our most sensitive nuclear site. Eventually, they had 9 nuclear reactors running there. And you got to understand, like, they are literally creating elements that don't exist in nature. Like, they take uranium and they create plutonium, but they are doing things that are like way off the charts in terms of unheard of. In fact, at Hanford, some of the very first UFO sightings are over Hanford, like, because it's, and Mount Adam.
It scared the heck out of the aliens. Like, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah. So you can't bring dolphins into the Columbia because the Columbia is freshwater and dolphins are saltwater creatures. So if you're a cold warrior, you're looking for ways to protect this site. And you know that the dolphin program was extremely successful. And so you're going to start going through, like, what are the creatures that we can deploy into a river that can, take down Soviet scuba divers. Well, you might try alligators for sure. But if you ask yourself, what is the world's most effective riverine hunter? It's a black panther. Black panthers can hold their breath for 15 minutes. They can swim over a kilometer in an open ocean. Pound for pound, they're the strongest of the big cats. They have night vision that's 6 times better than a human being. They can eat underwater, and they always instinctively drag their prey to shore. In fact, there's video footage of these, panthers, black jaguars, like killing caiman alligators with a single bite to the skull. I mean, they're extremely effective, right? And if you're a cold warrior, like, this checks all the boxes. Like, this is the perfect creature. If we could just train this thing to patrol the river coastline, we could take out any type of infiltrators. And we know for a fact that they had animal guardians at Hanford. There were 4 Nike missile sites there. Nike missile is a surface-to-air nuclear-tipped missile. Basically, the idea was, if Soviet bombers are coming, you send up this nuclear-tipped missile, you detonate it, and you can take out a bunch of different bombers. It doesn't matter that you're detonating a nuclear weapon over a civilian population, because it's better for that to happen than for them to take out Hanford. But each one of those Nike missile sites is guarded by dogs. And when you look at the historical literature, it says that they considered a dog to be worth 10 soldiers in terms of their ability to be guardians, sentinels. And so what we think may have happened was that there was a black jaguar training sentinel program out there. And they may have been genetically modifying these creatures. Jaguars are notoriously the hardest of the big cats to train. Lions are very easy. Obviously, lions are in every circus and zoo and everything. Lions and jaguars can breed. In fact, in Canada, there's a thing called a jag lion. A jaguar and a lion were living in captivity together, and they loved each other very much. And they had 2 offspring, and one of them is this giant black lion creature, right? So we do know that it's genetically possible for there to be enormous sized black jaguars if they're interbred with lions. And so what we think happened was, just like the alligators, they had this animal testing program. The creatures outsmarted the scientists and were able to escape into the wild. And then they were unable to recapture them. And if you look at the map behind me, you can see that whole eastern half of the map is desert. So if you're a big black cat and you've just escaped from a top secret government lab, you're not going to go north, east, or south deeper into the desert. You're going to head to the west, where there is all this available habitat and food and prey sources and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And so it's very possible that may be one of the reasons why we've got these big black cats running around Klickitat County. But the things that happened there at Hanford, I mean, even now, so Hanford closed down in the 80s. They had created enough plutonium for 60,000. Well, I've been out there. The reactors are closed. It's the Northern Hemisphere's greatest cleanup site. Like, it is a complete disaster in terms of nuclear and hazardous waste. In fact, there are wildlife biologists out there, right? And I talked to one of them who said that he had seen a three-eyed rattlesnake out on the Hanford Range. But kind of a funny story is that they have a guy whose job it is to track radioactive bunny poop. Because what the rabbits out there do is they sit next to these barrels of nuclear waste to stay warm. They get irradiated, and then they hop all around, and wherever they go, their poop is radioactive. And so they need to sort of catalog that and do things. Well, those rabbits are prey for the cats that live in the area, the wolves, the coyotes, all that kind of stuff. And so this stuff has been going on for decades. And what's interesting is that some of the reports of the ape cat here in Klickitat County, they go back 30 or 40 years. And so we've been having these stories in the area of big black cats for decades. One individual told us that they had seen the cat in his driveway with a cub. So this tells us that there's they're reproducing, and there's a population of these creatures living out here. Big cat tigers don't live much past 15 years. Cougars, probably 12 years is the maximum age you'd expect a cougar to live. And so for there to be reports that are 30 to 40 years old is telling us that these creatures are reproducing, and there's a population of them out here. So that is and I wanted to tell you that out on the Hanford nuclear site now, so they've repurposed it. There's a thing called the LIGO, which is it's a laser interferometer gravitational observatory. Basically, there are these vacuum tubes that are 2 miles long, set perpendicular to each other. The purpose is to identify anomalies in the space-time continuum. And a week after they turned this thing on, they found anomalies in the space-time continuum. And so, like, any kind of weird science fiction thing that you can imagine, like, it is actually happening out here, just upstream from the gorge. And so, whether these ape cats are creatures that are, some type of alien that has come down and is a part of the ECETI Ranch crew, whether it's some type of spirit beast that is, part of the Native American traditions, whether it's something from, that escaped from our nuclear heritage, Cold War legacy, we don't know. And that's kind of the thing that I love about it. Like, there's this, it is a bona fide mystery, and I don't have answers. I've got theories, but what's for sure is that people are seeing really, really unusual things out here in the Columbia River Gorge.
That is so awesome. Thank you so much for being part of this today. Hey, do you carry any special crystals when you go hunting?
There's a few things that I carry with me for protection, but really, my experience has been any type of crystal or any type of focus object that you bring with you is really setting your vibrational tone. And so there's a lot of things that I do. We sell crystals and stuff like that in the store, and sage sticks and all those type of things. But for me, the most important protection that you can do is maintaining a high vibration internally yourself. And so we never, for instance, we avoid this notion of self-identifying as a victim of anything at any time. And honestly, I'm inviting this into my stores with my employees, and I feel a responsibility to protect them from any kind of weirdness. We're obviously dealing with stuff that can get strange. And so it's our number one North Star for the business is that we always maintain a healthy and joyful work environment. Like, above all else, above profit, above everything else, this place where we spend so much of our time is a place that is going to be one of basically a high vibration. And to me, that is the best protection that I can provide, because basically we are repelling, or those darker things just never find us. They're just not a part of
Like
what we.
James, have you got any final questions for James? James, have you got any final questions for James?
I did have one, and maybe a follow-up. Do you think Sasquatch out there, or some of these other creatures, do you think there's a chance that they are more sort of intelligent than maybe the average person would think? And do you think there's something that they are waiting to show us or to share with us, and maybe we're not ready for it?
So the first question, yes, I do think that they're highly intelligent. So I've talked to many, many folks who've had encounters. There's one individual who has had dozens of encounters. Apparently his property seems to be a pinch point for their travel, through the area. And it's very clear, like in his estimation, he says they're clearly biological entities. They're animals. He has fur samples and footprints and all the things you'd expect. And so he's adamant about this idea that they're creatures, they're, beings. But then he will also say that they seem to have the ability to do limited teleportation, right? And so that indicates that they're not a normal type of creature. They're not like a wolf or a bear, because we don't know that. We've never had reports of bears teleporting short distances. Many other folks have had really interesting encounters. There's a man who talked to me when he was a boy. He was in this area and he'd found all these bottles sort of stacked up in an old ruined cabin, collecting water, bottles and bowls and things like that. And he looked up and there was a juvenile Sasquatch watching him from a tree, and they spent a few minutes looking at each other, and there was an intelligence there. And so of all these stories that I've heard, it's clear to me that these are highly capable, highly intelligent beings. They have their own culture that they work within. The Native Americans, we have stories that they have treaties with the Sasquatch for certain berry picking areas and mushroom gathering areas in the forest. So based on what I am hearing, they seem highly intelligent. The fact that some of them actually are able to transform into other orbs of light, we're talking about something which is just a whole nother, has capabilities that we don't understand and are far beyond what we do. So I think that answers your first question. Yes, I think they're highly intelligent. I don't think that they're animal intelligence. And I think that's part of why they're so elusive. They are capable of hiding from us very easily. In terms of do they have a message for us? I think that's on an individual basis. I don't think that there's a moment. I don't have the sense that there's a moment, and this is my personal opinion, whether the Sasquatches are going to come forward and announce their presence and have a message for the United Nations that we need to get our act together or something like that.
They would listen.
Might be what we need.
Yeah, but I do, I've heard stories where people have had extremely personally meaningful encounters, right? And so there's this idea, and in fact, many of the folks who've seen the ape cat have this same message where I knew that I was in the presence of something special. I knew that this was a special moment, right? And so I do think that there is if you are fortunate enough to have an encounter like that, there is the high possibility that they may have a message for you personally in terms of your personal spiritual growth arc or whatever that may be. So, but again, this is based on the conversations I've had, and to be sure, people could be lying to me. Like could be 200 people. Everyone who lives in the gorge is prone to falsehoods, but I don't believe that. I really thought that we'd have more folks coming in with tall tales, And I think we've maybe had a handful of them out of those 200. I mean, it's less than 5 people who were clearly just having fun. And but everyone else seemed very earnest and very genuine. And so I think I answered your question.
That's awesome. So James, so people can go to your website. We've got it all in the description, and drop in and see you at the store. And if you have messages, go ahead, stories, contact James online,
Yep.
and look up him there and see for further adventures for you. Right?
Yeah.
I can't.
Yeah,
can't
I would say one thing. Please come to the gorge. Like, if you are at all interested in finding wonder and being in a place that feels enchanted, there's no place like this on earth. It's stunningly beautiful. Even if you don't encounter an ape cat or a Sasquatch or a UFO, you will you'll find something magical here. And that's why I'm going on these interviews again, is because I want more people to experience this joy and wonder that has been a part of my experience now for a couple, almost 2.5 years. And so please come and check it out. A good place to start, margiesoutdoorstore.com.
Yeah, and we can start in northern BC and just follow the Columbia River all the way down. But I think we'll just probably fly in from Seattle too. Anyways, take care. Thank you so much, James. Stick with us, and thank you everyone for being patient. And we'll see you next week.